Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian, and welcome to Bird Bomb's Helpful Bursts of ID Info. Our topic tonight is Habitat Blast, Winter Birds Around Town. So we're going to be talking about birds that are associated with the habitats in our various metro areas along the Front Range. And I'm joined tonight by Laura Stedman, who will be coming in later on in the program to help with our Let It Fly segment. And if you have any questions or comments along the way, feel free to use our chat, or we'll have some opportunity at the end of the program to consider any questions you might have. So this is a very appropriate topic for bird bombs because most of the people watching live in one of the metro areas or generally, the developed regions along the Front Range of Colorado. And the topic tonight is going to focus a little bit on sort of on the Denver metro region, but the birds there are similar to the birds in, say, the Boulder region or Fort Collins region, or even down in Colorado Springs. And you get a little further afield down in the Pueblo region, but a lot of commonalities between all these areas that are centered around some of the larger cities here in Colorado and the various cities and smaller communities that are adjacent to those big places. And so we're going to focus on those birds. So it's really the things that are in our backyard, in a sense, if you will. And so I'm hoping it'll be a real helpful topic for you, connected to what you see around you in a lot of the places that you go birding on a regular basis. Want to highlight some cool illustrations I'm using here on this slide tonight by Gigi Zarzuela, who's not with us tonight, but sometimes she's joined as one of our panelists on bird bombs, and she does some great illustrations. So I've got a few of her pieces right here. All right, so before I go any further, though, I want to highlight that a lot of the former or prior bird bombs that I've done have information that's really applicable to birds that are in and around town in our metro regions here on the Colorado Front Range. So I've highlighted a few topics here that you can go back and look in our bird bombs library on the DFO page or in the DFO YouTube channel. And so raptors for real, eyes on geese and swans, get gullible, prairie hawks, better duck, and CBC explosion are a few of the episodes that are really connected to what we're talking about tonight. And if you look up any of the episodes that are kind of timed from late fall through the winter season, they'll be applicable to what we're covering tonight. So check those out. And when the first thing we might think about when we think about a metro area is like the downtown area, the most developed, the most unnatural areas within these metro regions that we're going to be talking about tonight. And the urban city centers, they don't have the most resources for birds because it's a lot of buildings and parking lots and kind of industrial type land uses. But still, there are birds that live in these areas, like in the landscape that I'm featuring here of downtown Denver. And some of those most characteristic urban birds can indeed be quite numerous in the city centers. So we'll take a little bit of time to consider what's going on with birds in right downtown, if you will. Some views of downtown Denver here. And one of the things that's prominent in downtown Denver are crows. These views actually are showing a spot where crows roost. But there's some other birds that we can enjoy down there too. And there are indeed, it's not all buildings and pavement and parking lots and all that. There are trees that come into play in different areas close to the city centers. And some areas have quite a lot of trees, maybe. But things are kind of limited as far as bird resources go in the city center areas of our metro areas. But there are some typical urban species, so we'll have a quick little look at those before we move on to a little more diverse areas within town. So I made a little listing here of some of the most typical urban species that we have. Some of these are not very numerous, but they're to be expected, like the red-tailed hawk, not really common down in the city center, but they're around. Some of them are very abundant, like the pigeon, rock pigeon, and American crow, and European starling, house finch, house sparrow. They can be very common birds. So I've highlighted a few of them with photos here. These are all very familiar birds to all of us. So we're not going to spend any time on the ID or anything, but these are some of the birds that we see in town. American crow, European starling, house sparrow, house finch, all very common and familiar birds to all of us. And thank goodness for these guys, so that do make it a little bit lively in some of the areas that would seem to have the least birds during the wintertime. But in addition to the most developed, the most urban settings with the skyscrapers or lots of office buildings and industrial type land uses, there are actually a wide range of habitats and settings in the metro areas along the Front Range, both human-made and natural or still semi-natural type areas. And I've listed out several of them here on the left-hand side. Along with the urban city centers and the urban industrial areas, there are suburban neighborhoods. Now, suburban is not always the best term, but when I'm here, I'm talking about neighborhoods that are basically single-family homes or maybe some apartments and condos and things like that, usually with landscaping and a lot of trees around and features like that. There's also city parks and greenways that are scattered throughout the metro areas. The parks may range from little spots with just maybe some turf and maybe a tennis court or something to large parks like the city park. And there may be lakes in those parks. And the greenways may have streams running through them. So we have lakes and ponds and wetland habitats associated with some of those, and in little pockets here and there. There are riparian corridors along the various streams and the Platte River, South Platte River, that more or less in different areas are either lined with a lot of cottonwoods and willows and box elders, or they may be more heavily impacted and not have so many trees. But these riparian corridors and streams are a very important part of the diversity within our metro areas. And there's patches of grassland and even scrub type habitats within town. And cemeteries, kind of like grassland, not really. And cemeteries often have large trees planted in them, particularly things like spruce. So cemeteries are sort of open, semi quasi natural areas that we find in town. Golf courses is another area with a lot of turf, but golf courses also have ponds, and they have trees planted in them. So in some senses, golf courses actually can be pretty good birding areas, although a lot of times access is kind of limited. And then there are here and there some landfills, which are very important for gulls, and wastewater um, inputs, either the wastewater facility itself or where it's pouring water into a stream, like the South Platte, for example. Those are very important habitat features, really, because they do affect the nature of the aquatic habitats in those streams and can be very attractive to a lot of ducks. So quite a bit of variety here. But one thing that's important to recognize right away is that as we're thinking about the winter season now, there's whole groups of birds that are here at other times of the year that are not represented at all or nearly not at all during this season. So, for example, shorebirds, very few around at this season, flycatchers, uh, um, thrushes, other than robins, and the solitaire. Vireos, can't find a vireo this time of year, right? The sparrows are a different assemblage of birds. The warblers are way thinned down to pretty much just one species plus some rarities that could turn up. So it's a much less diverse time than during the migration times or the breeding season. But still, there are characteristic birds that occur in our metro areas during the winter time, and a few species that come here particularly during the winter time and are not here otherwise. Some images of some of these different types of habitats that we find beyond just the city center type habitats. All right, so one of the places where there are actually a lot of birds are in our neighborhoods. And the neighborhoods have some of that variety, not only of what's planted around the homes, but also with green belts, greenways, and various parks dispersed throughout these neighborhood settings. But let's consider for a minute, just focus a little bit on kind of what are our backyard settings. And one of the things that's prominent about the developed part of town, as you can see in this picture on the left, having a look over towards downtown Denver, the city center, but you can see there's what we call an urban forest. And this oblique view, you can kind of see, all we see mostly are just tree canopies, and the houses and things, other buildings are not um, so prominent in this sort of a sideways view. And indeed, there is an urban forest in town that provides habitat for a lot of birds that are associated with woodland and forest settings. Includes a lot of different deciduous trees, especially cottonwoods, maple, ash, and a number of other ones. And then there are a lot of different conifer trees that are planted and maybe growing in some densities in some areas. Blue spruce is especially prominent. Several different species of pine trees, Douglas fir, and other conifers are out there in our metro areas that are providing a woodland slash almost forest type setting for a lot of bird species. And then we have planted around our homes and in some kind of areas that aren't quite so developed around near our homes, we have different kinds of shrubs and shrub cover. And these trees and shrubs are providing seeds and fruits for birds during the winter time. And there also are bird feeders. You know, if you've ever looked around for birds, you find out right away that the place to find them is where there are bird feeders. There's usually a lot of activity in a yard or near a yard with feeders, and sometimes rather little activity in yards that don't have any bird feeders. So they make a big difference in our neighborhood settings. So what is there to eat around town here? So there are seeds that are provided in a lot of different ways, but I listed here some prominent or important elements. Pine trees have cones that have their pine nuts available at different years. Sometimes there may be a great resource that's really available to birds. Other times it may be kind of sparse. Douglas fir seeds, spruce seeds. So all these cone-bearing trees provide seeds that birds use. And then there's herbaceous plants, either annuals or perennials that may provide seeds as well. The sunflower is an important one here in the Front Range region. If you're looking for birds, the sunflower patches, whether planted in yards or in parks, or just kind of growing up on their own in some disturbed area, are great places to find birds, goldfinches, sparrows, things like that. And then the trees and other plants that we have put in our yards and parks provide fruit, berries or berries like juniper. There's a lot of different kinds of crabapple trees that have different looking fruits and may be available at different times during the season. Hawthorn is another one, whether native species or non-native ones, and similar plants. And then the European buckthorn. Here we have those species here. So we have juniper on the lower left, and then a crabapple, and then a hawthorn, and then a European buckthorn on the upper right. Here, which you see is an invasive plant, but it has just millions of berries. And the birds don't use it all the time, but they do like it, and sometimes it becomes an important food source. I can remember back to our invasion of Bohemian waxwings that we had in the Front Range region. I think there was at least 3 winters ago, thousands of them showed up, and buckthorn was a big part of their diet until they ate every one of those berries. So it was really common when they got here, and then they were feasting on that. So these trees and shrubs that provide fruits and berries are really important for our winter birds. And then, of course, there are bird feeders. And I don't have to show you a lot of pictures of bird feeders, but you know what the deal is. So we have different kinds of seed mixes and suet that are available at feeding stations, and these are critical for many bird individuals during this time of year. And then not a food per se, but the water is also a resource that's available in backyards where people have bird baths or other water features that keep unfrozen during the winter and become important water sources for the birds that are in and around our yards. So let's take a look at some of the most typical suburban wintertime birds. I've made a list of some of them, and I'll continue on our next slide with some others. And we'll just highlight a few of them here. So I've got sharp-shinned hawk and Cooper's hawk illustrated here, and then a couple of our bigger raptors, the red-tailed hawk and the great horned owl as well. And these are birds that are distributed throughout the developed parts of town. It's fun to encounter different woodpeckers during the winter season. The hairy and downy woodpeckers. The downy is a lot more common than the hairy in town, but the hairy is regular in some areas. And very numerous, relatively, are northern flickers that love to visit our feeders and are along all of our greenways and really widespread throughout our neighborhoods. So continuing with our list here of the usual suspects, some of these are maybe not very numerous, like the brown creeper is not a numerous bird, but they're regular and around in our neighborhood settings. And some birds are very common and very regular. White-breasted nuthatch is kind of all over the place. Red-breasted nuthatch, if you have a lot of conifers around, black-capped chickadee, and then it says American robin there showing for bush tit, but we know that that's my problem um, with my animations on the screen here. But the group of birds on the feeder up here on the upper right are indeed bush tits. One of everybody's favorite birds that they might have visiting their yard as they come in little flocks of 10 or 15 or even 20 bush tits at a time. There's our robin. Townsend solitaire, less common, but also occurs in town, especially where there are juniper berries available. Good example of how a particular plant is providing a key resource for a bird species. Townsend solitaire is highly associated with junipers, and American goldfinch and dark-eyed junco. And then sometimes we are treated with some other species that aren't really so common in or around town, or maybe completely absent in some years. Steller's jay and pygmy nuthatch, Cassin's finch, evening grosbeak occasionally move down out of the mountains to visit our developed areas, and maybe the red crossbill when they're around. And then sometimes we have real treat, like when the Bohemian waxwings move in every 15 years or so, we get a significant invasion of Bohemian waxwings. So it's very infrequent. Each year there'll be reports of a few here and there, pretty much, but rarely do we have big flocks. And then not really usually in any numbers in town, but occasionally showing up are red poles, what we used to call the common red pole, now just red pole. Is a bird that we sometimes see at bird feeders around town, and a little more so out away from town. So those are real treats when we have these sorts of birds showing up in our yards if you live down out of the hills. And I'm not going to spend any more time other than this slide focusing on a number of different birds that are associated with our lakes and reservoirs. I put on here some of the geese and waterfowl and other water birds that are the most frequent among those that visit our reservoirs and lakes and ponds and things. We'll take a little bit more look at stream settings in just a moment. But these are some of the birds that add a lot of diversity to our area during the winter. But I've covered them well in some of my other bird bombs, Better Duck, for example. And so check those out. Eyes on Geese and Swans has a good tutorial on goose ID. And right now we have a lot of cackling and Canada geese around, and they can be a challenge for us to identify. So check out the Eyes on Geese and Swans video. But let's focus a little bit on the habitats that are associated with our streams. And a lot of the streams have now greenbelt lands that are dedicated open space areas that are basically centered on the stream corridor. I can think in my region here in the Denver metro area of Bear Creek Greenbelt and the Wheat Ridge Greenbelt, two very, very popular birding areas that have really nice riparian habitat and also the stream corridor itself, and in both cases, some areas of wetland habitat. So there are a distinctive group of birds that are associated with the riparian and streamside habitats, the aquatic habitat, and the trees that grow around it. Here we're talking about cottonwoods, willows, box elder, some areas Russian olive is prominent. Um, and the creek habitats tend not to freeze. They may have some frozen spots, but there's always open water because it's flowing. And some areas have an inflow of sewage, treated sewage wastewater that may be nutrient rich and a little bit warmer. So uh, boosting the food opportunities through the nutrients that are in that treated wastewater, and also the warmth of the water, keeping things open and flowing, allowing opportunities for birds to use that area. So here's a few images of some of the characteristic um, riparian and stream birds that we have. The green-winged teal, one of the one of the common ducks in some of our streams. Eastern screech owl, not so common, but the riparian areas along streams and lake shores and some of the parks are what they depend on to find their homes. Brown creeper is always a treat to find along our riparian corridors. Song sparrow, very typical bird of the streamside edge and any wetlands that may be in that area. And I want to focus now a little bit on some of what I call the streamside specialties. So these are some cool birds that may not be particularly rare. The killdeer, for example, very familiar, and other times of the year is very numerous. But during this time of the year, the place where you're most likely to find a killdeer is probably along one of the larger streams. So they're a streamside specialty. The Wilson snipe, if you're going to find a snipe now, it's going to be associated with a streamside edge or some other type of spring water type situation that's going on, where there's some open water and the snipes like to forage along the edge of our streams. And belted kingfisher, while they like lakes and all that, they're also regularly found along our water courses. So really cool birds here make up our streamside specialties. Just like we see the snipe along rivers and streams, the place where you're going to find an American pipit at this season is also going to be along a water edge of one of our streams or rivers. And the swamp sparrow is a really cool bird, not very common, but if you know what they sound like and you know the places you're likely to find them, you might be lucky to fish up a swamp sparrow and have a look. Even a little also uncommon to rare and sometimes not really around at all, but one of the birds that finds its home along our waterway edges where there's trees providing shade over the water in particular is the rusty blackbird, really fun bird to find. And I want to highlight now one of the stream's own darling. So paraphrasing a bit there from John Muir, the American dipper, also known as the water ouzel. So kind of an old-fashioned name, but some people still like it. And the dipper is a really special bird, and it is our only aquatic songbird. I've got a great quote here from John Muir from quite a long time ago, but he really captures the spirit of the dipper very well. And you can find dippers during the winter season along like Bear Creek, um, locally along the Platte as far down at least as about where 470 crosses, and then along Clear Creek, and occasionally some of the other streams. I know they're along Boulder Creek up north from the Denver area and elsewhere. And so people love to look for the dippers. They really have a penchant for living around bridges where it's kind of shady and dark underneath, and their gray plumage blends right into the shaded gray water and gray rocks. You can also see them out in open areas as well, but they really do like the area around bridges for whatever reason. Maybe because there's often some kind of whitewater type features there, and for whatever reason, maybe the feeding is good. But dippers are beautiful birds, and they're totally wedded to the aquatic habitat. You do not see them away from water habitats like ever. And so that's pretty awesome for a songbird. Some great shots here by Ann Craig of dippers along the Bear Creek Greenbelt in Lakewood. It's always a good day when you see a dipper. So let's consider a little ID focus on a couple groups here. First, I want to start with the juncos. And juncos we see in our backyards, in our parks, in our green belts. And I like to think of the Front Range as the great junco melting pot. It's probably one of the best places in the world um, to see a variety of juncos, often all together. This year in my own yard, it wasn't until I think the beginning of November that I had juncos show up in any number more than one or two. And on that day, there was 5 different forms of juncos. So if you go back, say to the before the mid 70s, your bird books then would have shown several different junco species. You would have had a slate-colored junco, an Oregon junco, a gray-headed junco, a white-winged junco. There's one in southeast Arizona, yellow-eyed junco. But most of those were all lumped together into one species called the dark-eyed junco. That's what we're familiar with. But if you use eBird or you study your field guide, you know that there are a lot of other junco possibilities that are presented on our checklist. And so here in the Front Range region, there are 6 of them, plus hybrids. Now, I'm not going to delve into the hybrids tonight because I just don't have time, but we do have 6 different kinds of junco forms, if you will, or subspecies. There are actually often more than one subspecies that may be grouped into a subspecies group, and we're familiar with name of Oregon junco, for example, but there are several different subspecies within the Oregon subspecies group. So it's a little complicated in reality, but for simplicity's sake, we can lump those together, and they generally have very similar appearances. So we have in our region, I put up the maps of where these birds breed. So these maps are the breeding ranges according to eBird for these different junco subspecies. You can see they're kind of all over the map, literally, pun intended. We have the very widespread breeding slate-colored and fairly widespread breeding Oregon, and then more locally distributed Cassiar junco, which is actually what we call the cismontanus junco in eBird, and the pink-sided junco and the gray-headed junco and the white-winged junco have much more limited ranges. The gray-headed is our main breeding, is pretty much the only breeding junco here in Colorado. I'm not sure if the pink-sided barely makes it into the northwest corner of the state, but pretty much not. We have gray-headed junco during most of the year, and it's joined by all these other ones during the fall and winter. And then the white-winged junco is kind of cool because it has a very limited breeding range. I think the little dot there in Colorado is actually a bird that was maybe out of season or something because they don't nest in Colorado, I don't believe, but they're primarily in the Black Hills region and to the north of Colorado. So that's kind of a special one. But you see, it's here I put up the Latin names for these different subspecies groups. And the white-winged junco has, you may be familiar with the Aiken Audubon Society down in El Paso County. And the white-winged junco is named after Mr. Aiken, Aiken I there. So that's kind of fun. And then some sources will consider the pink-sided Junco Mearnsey uh, as part of the Oregon group. So sometimes it's not differentiated out, but eBird does, and it has some distinctive features there. So it's kind of fun to look at the breeding ranges for these birds. But we're not going to worry about that because at this time of year we get them all, and they're all right here in the Front Range region, and most of them throughout much of Colorado as well. So we have a puzzle among the Juncos to sort out. And so I've got examples here of all 6 of these different forms and labeled so you can see what's what. And you can see that they have some um, variations on a theme of mostly having dark heads or darker heads and sometimes pale underparts. Some of them have a hooded look. Some of them have dark around the lores, that area between the bill and the eye. And some of them are sort of like one color mostly, and others have various shades of brown or even kind of a pinkish tone highlighting their plumage. So the slate colored on the upper left is usually characterized. One thing to keep in mind in some of the forms, the males are kind of more brightly colored or more darkly colored, like in the case of slate color. Um, and the females are a little more less contrasty, and then immatures are kind of the least contrasty, especially immature females. But with the slate colored Junco, it has a kind of a uniform appearance, and it pretty much just has the slatey color above and onto the sides, and then white on the belly, and that's it. There's no other prominent features. I'll just toss out that occasionally some will show a little bit of white wing bar effect. That's not very common, but sometimes so. So there's no hood here on the slate colored, and the sides pretty much match the color of the rest of the bird. There's no really contrasting dark lores that stand out. The back is slate colored as well. Sometimes it may have a hint of brownish. I mentioned males are darker than females. So our slate colored is kind of the uniform Junco out of the group, the most uniform that we have. Then the Cassiar Junco, or one that eBird calls cismontanus, is kind of in between a slate colored and a Oregon, but it has a hooded effect like the Oregon. So contrasting head color, contrasting with the back, and the back is gray, and it has gray on the sides that's notably paler than the head. So we can look over right ahead to our Oregon here. It's brownish on the sides. This particular photo is showing a really kind of a pale color tone there, but it's more brown. The Cassiar or cismontanus form is gray. So gray back, gray sides, and the hooded type look. So kind of recalling an Oregon Junco. The Oregon has definitely a dark hood. The males, it's black or blackish. On the females, it's lighter colored. And they have brown along their sides, and it's kind of a narrow wash of brown along the side here. It's not extending very far. Let's just contrast with the pink-sided on the lower left, which has much more extensive brownish or pink tones there along its sides. And the back is brown and really nice contrast with the hood. So you have brown and brown versus gray and gray on the Cassiar, and pronounced hood contrast on the Oregon Junco. Pink-sided is, I think, maybe our prettiest of our winter Juncos. Especially the adult male is really brightly marked and is nice contrast. So they have a light gray hood, so it's not black or blackish, but it's light gray. And the dark lores usually contrast rather strongly with the light gray hood. And as I was mentioning, its sides are extensively, broadly pinkish. And so it's not like a real pink like on a rosy finch, but it has definitely some very warm tone brown. It's different in quality from the brown on the Oregon Junco. Maybe we'll see in another image some of that more typical brown on the Oregon. but definitely a different color tone and very broadly marked on the sides of the pink-sided junco. And it has a warm brown back. It kind of recalls the back of a gray-headed junco, but it's not as bright. So here's our gray-headed junco, and kind of like the slate colored, it's pretty uniform in its overall coloration. It has only two things that are breaking up the color pattern. One is this red-brown back, and the other are these contrasty dark lores, and its sides are gray. So you can see it's not dissimilar if you don't look at the sides. It's not very dissimilar to the pink-sided junco. They're kind of have a lot in common, but this is gray on the gray-headed junco, and it's that pinky brown on the pink-sided junco. So this is kind of like a mix and match of all these different possibilities. So we'll take our last form here is one that I think is the hardest one to find. I don't see them very often. Laura was just saying she saw one very recently. I don't know if that was today or when that was, but um, they are the subspecies that breeds very locally north of Colorado. And when we see them in Colorado, they're most often in the foothills area, sometimes out in the prairie. And this is the white-winged junco. It's actually a little bit larger and slightly bigger build than the other forms. And it has two white wing bars. Now, if you look at this picture, you can sort of see one of them really well. The other one is there, but it's hidden. So these feathers up here are called the scapulars, and they can lie over the upper wing bar. So sometimes it'll obscure that upper wing bar and it might be hard to see. And the extent of the wing bars in the white-winged junco are a little variable. Sometimes they're very prominent, other times they're really not much going on there by way of a wing bar. But this bird is kind of looks like the slate-colored junco. It's paler though, paler gray, so not as slaty, more of a light gray. And it has that contrasty dark area usually showing in the lores, which the slate colored does not really have much contrast there. So the darkest lores, pale gray sides, mostly light gray overall. And then if you see them, of course, the wing bars are a good giveaway to take a careful look at that junco. So they have a very strong association here in the Front Range region with ponderosa pine forest or other woodland that has some ponderosa in it. So that's a great place to be looking for them. Got a few other photos here of each of the different forms. You can see a slate colored here looking very blackish, as they sometimes do. Here's that Cassiar cismontanus. Remember, gray sides. Let's contrast with the Oregon, which has brown sides. Gray back on the Cassiar cismontanus form, brown back on the Oregon. This Oregon is maybe a female without the black hood. She has a gray hood, unlike the black-hooded male Oregon junco. And then this pink-sided junco, I selected one that's a little more drably marked than the other one I showed. Also maybe a female with a less contrast going on in the face, less brightly colored on the sides. But you can see again the extensive coloration on the sides coming way down onto the bird versus the more restricted coloration on the Oregon junco. And the back is not gray, it's actually a little bit brownish there, right? So that's helping us distinguish it as well. Here we have the gray-headed, very contrasty back in this image. Male and female gray-headeds look the same. They're no strong differences between the sexes there, so they all pretty much have this bright coloration and contrast. And here's a white-winged junco showing both wing bars this time, and pretty prominent there, so that would certainly catch your eye. This one's a little darker than the one I had in the previous image. So they can be a little bit more darkly colored, but they're not as dark as the slate colored junco. All right, I think we're going to go to a Let It Fly segment. So I want to welcome Laura in here if your power hasn't gone off.
Hasn't.
There
Hello,
you
hello.
are. All right, so welcome aboard. So we'll just spend a little time looking at some of our juncos here, and I've got them all numbered. You can go with whatever you want first, but I thought maybe you could help give me your thoughts on what these different forms are or subspecies and what you notice about them.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so starting with number one, I see that it's kind of gray. I don't really see brown on it. And those two wing bars jump out at me. You see both the upper and lower one. Um, and so for me, I would call that a white-winged junco. You can see like the bill even, it just has a different look to it. It's almost like
Yeah.
I know in the field when I saw a white-winged junco this past weekend on the Boulder CBC and the bill just it looked almost wrong for a junco. And it just jumps out at you. So I
Cool.
call one a white-winged.
Okay.
Two, that dark, almost black hood jumps out, and then the brown sides. So I would call that an Oregon junco.
Great.
Number three, I see a gray head and that kind of pinky orange back. So I would call that our gray-headed junco.
A lot of contrast on the back on that bird. Very
Yeah.
stands out pretty
Yeah.
much all the time.
Yeah, and we call it gray-headed, but like most of these birds have gray heads, and that orange back is the thing that I frequently look at in the field, and I think, oh, orangey back, that's a gray-headed junco. Four, again, we've got a gray head, but we've got that pinky orange side. We can't see the back of this bird, but based on the sides there, and the gray head's not really a hood, so to speak. I would call that a pink-sided junco.
So what are the differences in this view for that in the Oregon? You mentioned about
Yeah.
the kind of hooded looks. You're seeing like Oregon being more hooded. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think so. And then the orangey pink on the sides there is pretty extensive.
All right. See
Uh,
how on the Oregon it's just kind of a relatively narrow band, and this one's
yeah.
extending way out towards the lower breast or
hmm
belly.
It's a it's very strong, like, oh, there are pink orange marks on that bird rather than just sort of diffuse patterning. Number five, that bird looks all gray and white. I don't see any orange on it. It doesn't really have a hood. You talked about the lures being dark on some of the birds, and it doesn't really have super dark lures, so I would call that a slate junco.
Slate color, good.
And then number six, so I see a hood there. It kind of extends a little further down on its chest and belly than maybe the Oregon in number two. And there's maybe a little bit of buffy on the sides, but it's not really doesn't really have that like brown orange tone as far as I can see. So I'd probably lean to the Cassiar for that one.
Great, and the back color being gray is a good mark
Yeah,
for
oh,
that
right,
too
right.
versus
Yeah,
brown. Now, there actually is, I think you got all those right on target. There actually is a little more variation than I'm able to present here
for
in
sure.
our short little look tonight. So, and then there are the hybrids or intergrades would be a more appropriate term since these aren't different species now, but considered subspecies. And so when the subspecies interbreed, they can produce birds that are sort of intermediate. And anytime you're looking at a lot of juncos, it's not unusual to see something that you might diagnose as a hybrid, particularly like uh, slate-colored Cassiar, um, the Oregon and pink-sided kind of blending together, and other combinations that make it sometimes difficult to figure out what you're looking at. And it's
For sure.
okay to not be able to figure out all these birds. If you're able to get a photo, you might be able to make a more detailed study after the fact. But recognize that there is some variation indeed that we deal with. But a lot of them, if you have a reasonable look, you can figure out which of the different subspecies you're dealing with. So good job with those. So let's continue to another group here. Um, and this is the birds in the genus Spinus. So these are the goldfinches, which includes the pine siskin. And I love the pine siskin's scientific name is Spinus pinus. Fantastic name. Everybody should memorize that scientific name there for the pine siskin, Spinus pinus, and have fun with that one. So we have the pine siskin, the lesser goldfinch, and the American goldfinch. Now, while the pine siskin can be very numerous during the winter, sometimes in town, some winters not so much in town, and the American goldfinch is fairly common during the winter. The lesser goldfinch is less so. Their main season is the breeding season, and that's when they're the most widespread and the most numerous. But we do have them around at this time of year as well, and in some locations, some yards, some parks they may occur on a regular basis. So you always want to keep the lesser goldfinch on the radar screen. And then the pine siskin kind of easy to identify out of these three, but there is another bird that looks sort of similar. And that, of course, is, oops, I want to, before I, let's see. Yeah, never mind. Let me back up. So this is, of course, the house finch. And you can see just in a very general sense, they bear a lot of similarities. Some things that are different. The house finch is a bigger bird, quite a bit heftier than the little pine siskin, which is a goldfinch-sized bird. And the bills are different. Notice the house finch has a broader, more rounded conical bill versus the rather pointy bill of the pine siskin. And then the pine siskin is more crisply marked than most house finches are. Sometimes it has yellow. You can see a little hint of that. Yellow in the wings and tail. Not always, as we'll mention in a bit. And the pine siskin has a deeply forked tail, very prominent notch there. The house finch, a very shallow notch, or sometimes not really showing much of one at all. So we don't want to get fooled with the house finch. Usually the size and the bill will give it away right away. So here's some of the features we might look at on these uh, spinous birds. And we can start with the pine siskin up above top center. It's very streaked underneath and on the back as well. Has that deeply forked tail or notched tail. Its bill very sharp, and it may have yellow in the wings and in the tail. Now, some individuals, like I have pine siskins visiting my yard right now on a daily basis, 15 to 20 birds, and none of them show any yellow. Sometimes you'll see most of the birds in a flock will show yellow, or some of them will. I'm not totally clear on what's going on with the yellow or lack of yellow. I think it has something to do with age of the bird. Older birds having tending to have more yellow and brighter coloration there. That's always a good, uh, great ID feature when you see it, but a lot of times it's kind of lacking or may not be very prominent, as in the bird shown here. The lesser goldfinch is yellow underneath. It may be very drab yellowish, or it may be fairly bright. I've got some pictures of males on the next slide that we can look at. The males are very bright yellow underneath, and they pretty much look the same all year except during their brief molting periods. So this is a female type or maybe an immature, I think probably a female. And they're not as they're kind of drab, but they're still yellowish underneath. And one of the things that's important to look at is this, what I call the wing panel, which I'm just conflating these lesser and greater, or median and greater secondary coverts, the tertials, the primaries is all the wing panel. And on this bird, we can see two wing bars, and this is on the tips of the median and greater secondary coverts are forming those wing bars. These white pale markings are the tertials, and then there's some secondaries folded under right there, and the long primaries also have some pale edging. There's an extra little mark here. See this little mark that's going kind of perpendicular to the wing bar. Vertical might not be the right term, but perpendicular to the wing bar. In my mind, I always call it the check mark. I'm not quite sure why, but that's the term I've always used. But there's an extra little mark there. And so the lesser goldfinch has that mark. And occasionally the American will as well, but the lesser is prominent. Now on the adult male and the immature male, it's a very prominent marking. On the female, immature female, it's less prominent, like on this bird. But that is a good mark to look for. But the other important thing is see how this is kind of messy looking. It's not very contrasty. It's kind of muted overall. And let's contrast that right away with the American goldfinch situation, which is very boldly marked on the wing panel, rather blackish and bright white markings versus more olivey brown and more muted white markings on the wing bars and things on this lesser goldfinch. So really important difference there that can often take you to the correct ID right away. This is the smallest of these three spinous species, and it has the smallest bill. So lesser is an appropriate term for this goldfinch. Now, the American goldfinch, it doesn't look like the bright shining males that we see in the breeding season because they molt into a non-breeding plumage or a basic plumage that is much drabber. Unlike the lesser goldfinch, its wintertime colors are the same as its breeding season colors for the most part. The American goldfinch is strikingly different, however. So we have the drab Americans around now. Now, some are going to be a little brighter than others, but never all yellow underneath with the black little beanie that the breeding plumage and yellow on the back that the breeding plumage American goldfinch has. So we see birds that are more drab, usually with a little bit of yellowish on the face and a wash of brown around the ear coverts or auriculars. The back is kind of brownish. The underparts are less yellow than they are whitish. So you can look at the lesser yellowish and the American whitish. And again, that wing panel with very prominent wing bars set off by the very blackish coloration of the rest of the wing panel. So very clean looking and very muted looking. Clean on the American and more muted on the lesser goldfinch. So here's some other images of our three species here. And looking at the pine siskin, here's one that has a lot of yellow in the wings, and this yellow is on the primaries and some in the tail. And it has the two wing bars, sometimes can look yellow as well. In this case, they're kind of white. Here's an underside view. You can see very prominent streaking, very notched tail, streaks on the undertail coverts. Here's a pine siskin that's very drab without any yellow showing. So same species, different appearance there in terms of the yellow. This one's a little bit maybe intermediate there between. Notice the very sharp bill on the pine siskin. Now the lesser goldfinch in the middle, here's a couple adult males along the top, and you'll see we have two different kinds that we can see. One is a black-backed form, which we do have here in the Front Range region and other parts of Colorado. The other is not black-backed, and so this is little more widespread among the two different forms of the lesser goldfinch. And but they both have bright yellow underneath and black on the head at this time of year, and big white patches at the bases of the primaries. And unlike the American goldfinch that has the prominent white wing bars, the wing bars on the male lessers are more subdued. So this white patch here um, is very different than on any other. But we can contrast, go down here now to some female type goldfinches. This one here has a fairly prominent white patch, white marking I was talking about that's going perpendicular to the lower wing bar. And on this one here on the left, a very drab bird, maybe an um, immature female has just a little bit of that, hardly any, but there's still something there. And the wing panel is more of an olivey, dusky color, not really cleanly black, right? So let's move over to the American goldfinch here, wintertime plumage, and we see again that very black wing panel with contrasty white wing bars. Remember, I talked about how on the junco on the white wing junco that the scapulars were laying over the top of the upper wing bar, and that's what's happening here. We only see one prominent wing bar in this picture, and the other one you can see a bit of it peeking out, but these feathers are hanging over the top of that. That will change when the bird repositions itself, but sometimes you don't see the upper wing bar much, so don't get fooled looking for two. Here's one where we do see the two wing bars, and these images on the bottom we see that one wing bar prominent and the upper wing bar kind of obscured on all these ones that we can see well. But notice the kind of muted coloration compared to the lesser goldfinch, more whitish underneath, whitish or brownish even, and the very prominent wing panel contrast going on. Here's these three species in flight. We can see a little bit of where their markings are. There's that, you see that in the upper left pine siskin, we have this yellow here is in the primaries. Here we see that same area right there um, that forms the yellow there when those wing feathers are closed and the two wing bars. And the pine siskin also can show yellow in the tail. It's not pretty evident in this particular photo, I think, because the tail's pretty closed on this particular view. The lesser goldfinch in the middle and the American on the right. Here's that big white patch that's forming that mark on the lesser goldfinch's wing. So very distinctive when the bird flies over because you have a bold white patch showing in the wing. And then it has white in the tail as well that you see when the bird's in flight. And notice the white is along the middle and base of the tail in contrast to the American goldfinch where the white is toward the tips of the tail feathers. Something fun to look for next time you see goldfinches flying. See if you can see the white markings a little different than you do when the bird is perched. All right, so we'll go to another Let It Fly segment here. And Laura, you can tell me what you think you noticed about these birds.
All right, yeah. So looking at number one, the bird on the left has that dark head, that to me jumps out as a lesser goldfinch. And then on the right, that looks like a house finch to me.
Oh,
You can
I
really see
didn't
the
fool you.
Huh? Did you fool me?
I didn't know.
Oh.
You got it. I thought, no, I knew you
Oh.
wouldn't. I knew you wouldn't get tripped up. But yeah, you can really see the size difference really well.
Yeah, the size difference is really cool there. You can see how small that lesser goldfinch is, and the house finch has that kind of drab overall appearance, the streaking on the belly, and doesn't have a facial pattern that I would expect from like a Cassin's finch or something.
Okay.
And also much bigger than a siskin would be, right? And different colors. Speaking of siskins, and number two, it looks like a siskin to me. I see that pointy bill. I see that deeply forked tail that has a little bit of yellow on it. And we can't really see a whole lot of yellow on the back, but it definitely looks siskiny to me. I
Much
think
more
it's,
streaky looking than the house finch
yeah,
too.
very streaky and little. You can see it, perched on that little seed head there. So moving to number three, we just looked at um, the birds in flight, the photos you just showed, and the lesser goldfinch really has those big patches and on its wings, and this bird doesn't, but it's overall drab yellow. It's not streaky. So this looks like a wintertime American goldfinch to me.
You also notice that very black and white contrasty
Yeah,
pattern here on the
very
wing.
strong contrast. And then,
Strong contrast.
looking at the bill too, it doesn't have that pointy siskin bill. Um, so that rules that one out too. Number four, this was a little trickier. We can't really see the wings in enough definition to say it has really strong contrast like in number three. They're wintering birds, so they don't have the dark black cap that a lesser goldfinch might have. We can say that they're not siskins because they're not streaky at all. Um, One of the things that jumps out at me on this photo is that bird on the upper left has that check mark you were talking about right there. Yeah, that the lesser goldfinches have. And so looking at that and looking at, their heads do have a little bit of darkness on them. I would go with a lesser goldfinch on these.
Great. Yeah. So that check mark is kind of perpendicular, if you will, to that lower wing bar, um, and it doesn't look as contrasty on the wing as the American goldfinch, and so that's a
Hmm.
good mark. But that I think that is a key mark there, um, and I think one, or at least I think two of these birds might be immature birds
Mm.
And this, I think, may be an older female, but they're also kind of yellowish underneath,
Hmm. Hmm.
instead of kind of whitish or brownish. Not very bright, certainly kind of dull, particularly on this one
Yeah.
on the bottom, but a little bit yellowish. So good. So lesser
Yeah.
goldfinches there. What do you think about the last one?
Yeah, so kind of comparing that to number four, I see a little bit of a check mark. So at first I'm like, oh, did we double up here? And we've got two lesser photos. But it's not, looking at the wings, they seem like they look kind of worn out. Those wings look kind of frayed. Um, they're not super duper contrasty like we see in photo number three, but they also have a little bit of definition. Um, the underside of that bird looks rather pale, so I'm leaning towards American goldfinch despite that small piece of a check mark.
Mm. Well, this is a good example of how these birds can be a little bit tricky because I think that
Yeah,
is a lesser
you think it's
goldfinch.
lesser. All right.
So what I see is that it's not black here. It's
Yeah.
kind of more muted tone, not as black like we see in number three. And American can show some pale. Let's see if I can see here on here we have those are pale tips on the
Hmm.
primary coverts there. It can show a little bit of that same mark, but it's usually not as prominent as on this bird,
Mm.
which is not as prominent as on some other lessers might be. And the color is a little hard to call, so I
That's
can
true.
resonate with your assessment there. Being a photograph, you never quite know with the exposures and lighting and all that what how that might play out for these kind of subtle colorations. But so that's a little bit equivocal. But this is indeed, I think, a lesser goldfinch.
Lesser. Cool. Yeah.
But that's a good example. And then here we only have the one angle, the bird's looking away, and we can't see
Yeah,
the
for
rest of
sure.
the underparts very well. So it's not to our advantage in our little game here. But it does point up that sometimes you need to look. You need to give careful consideration before an idea is going to be obvious to you.
Yeah,
So a
for
good
sure.
example of that. All right, so that's I just want to close with two rules of thumb or guidelines when you're birding in and around our metro areas. If you see a gull flying around and you're not at directly at a large body of water or at a landfill, it's going to be a ring-billed gull, like almost all the time. The gull you see flying over. Now, there's going to be exceptions, but they're rare. And in many places, many of our lakes have just the ring-billed gull, especially not if it's not one of the bigger bodies of water or if you're not at a landfill or something. It's going to be a ring-billed gull, so you can confidently look up with your birding friends and say, "There goes a ring-billed gull." Now, to be honest, you could say gull spa or whatever, but it really is a ringbill so much of the time. So that's a good rule of thumb for our metro areas at this time of year. Very common, comprising the great majority, like 98% of the gulls around in the region are ring-billed gulls. And then if you happen to see a hawk sitting around at this time of year and you're not out in some wide open prairie setting, it's very probably a red-tailed hawk. In fact, that's what it's going to turn out to be, unless you're out in some open prairie type habitats where you're more likely to encounter a ferruginous hawk or a rough-legged hawk. But in the developed area proper, those species are actually pretty uncommon to rare, even exceptional in town, if you will. So it's probably a ringbill. It's probably a red tail. Good rule of thumb. You can impress your friends with your confident IDs, even though you may not be certain in reality, but speak like you're certain. So I want to say thanks to the photographers whose images I used tonight. Without you all, I wouldn't be able to prepare these bird bombs. So thank you very much uh, for um, for having your work be a part of these presentations. And a little special thing here at the end, a little bush tit circle, if you will, on some suet. And so I don't know what the next bird bombs will be or when it will be. It'll probably be in February, but I don't have it planned yet, so I'm not advertising any date. But keep an eye out on CoBirds, our DFO Facebook page, and in our maybe even in our Lark Bunting newsletter or other communications to find out what the next bird bombs will be. In the meantime, keep an eye out for the birds in your backyard and around town and have a great winter birding season. I'm going to stop sharing now. We'll see if we have any questions or any comments or anything.
Yeah, and if you do have questions, feel free to drop it in the chat or in the Q&A and I'll grab those. First off, David, we talked about like these are the wintering birds, and we can find these in, all kinds of habitats, urban, suburban, that sort of thing. Um, if someone wanted to practice their juncos and their spinous finches, what are good ways to do that this winter?
Well, I think in both cases, bird feeders are a great way to do that because that's where the birds concentrate. And if you're, especially in the case of both those, uh, kind of close to the edge of the foothills is a really good place to be.
Yeah.
So if you get too far east, like eastern part of the Denver metro area, the pine siskins become less prominent. In some years they're really numerous, other years they're less so. But the place where they're more consistent is closer to where there's actual native forest. And so
Mm.
along the base of the foothills is a good place. And the juncos reach their kind of greatest numbers and variety in any one flock in that same sort of zone. It used to be a fantastic opportunity at Red Rock's Trading Post when they had bird feeding going on there, and you could see lots and lots of juncos of all the varieties. But any place that has feeders is a good place to focus on to increase your odds, and you're likely to see 5 of those 6 forms in any one spot. The white-winged is a little less frequent, and but so you might not find that one without going maybe to search in some sort of areas with ponderosa pines up in the foothills themselves and out of the developed area. But those are good types of places to look. So um, riparian habitats are good for the lesser and the American and even pine siskin sometimes, depending on what's around for them to eat.
Yeah, you were mentioning that you've got pine siskins down by you, and I've got them up here in Boulder. They've been hanging out at CU South a lot lately. Um, cool. Chris said that the Junko comparison was super helpful. I agree. It's always, every October, November when they start rolling down the hill and showing up, I'm like, I gotta refresh those a little bit. So, um,
Great.
it's December, it's CBC season. Do you have any recommendations or encouragement for folks who maybe haven't done that kind of birding before and might be interested? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, the Christmas bird counts are an important source of information on our bird populations, and they're also a lot of fun. Now, if the weather is not so good, it may be a little bit painful, but on the other hand, some of the best birding can happen during the stormy times. It's kind of ironic. Hopefully, we won't have big giant winds like we had yesterday out on the CBC. That's no fun. But the Christmas bird count can be a great way to pair up with some other good birders and learn from them and also probably visit some new areas. Each circle, you can find the information from the National Audubon Society's Christmas bird count page. Um, each circle has a number of different areas that it's divided into, each with teams of birders and a leader who's an experienced birder who can, even if you're not so quite so red hot as that person, they'll help you along. But you can probably encounter some new areas and contribute to some good citizen science as well. Now, it's if you've never done it before, it's really a lot of fun because the point is to just count every bird you can find and identify them,
Yeah.
and so that's just a fun challenge, and everything counts. So everything's good to go. So you're not cherry picking, but everything's important to look for, and it also You don't necessarily have to do the full day effort. A lot of groups will start, maybe at 8 or 7:30 in the morning and go for most of the day. But a lot of times it's possible just to bird for a few hours or so and break off from the group. So you can do it a little more low key. And if you just want to stay around your own yard or neighborhood and not join with a group, contact the count compiler because they always are looking for feeder watchers, they call them. And you can just bird in your own backyard and report your numbers to be part of the count's results. So great way to contribute even just doing that. And like I was saying, feeders are a key part of where the birds are for a lot of our land birds at this time of year. So you'll definitely can make a great contribution. So look on the Audubon Christmas bird count page to connect with compilers. We have count circles all over our our Front Range region and elsewhere in Colorado, and some of them have already happened. They began on the 14th of December, but they'll continue to, I think it's the 5th of January. So there's still a number of counts coming up that you can get into. My Denver area count is happening this Saturday, and I'll be working in the section that I live in for that one. So I've been doing Christmas counts for almost my entire birding career, 43 years, and it's been a highlight every year. So I really recommend it.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, I think that is all the questions. I don't see anything else coming in. So thanks, David, and I'll see you at the CBC on Saturday.
All right, great. Thank you, Laura, for helping out tonight and everybody for watching. And keep an eye out for the next bird bombs whenever I figure out what and when it's going to be. So good night, everyone.